Hello, and welcome to Any Given Sunday on KUAW radio. I am Brian Kress, the Awesome Voice. Across from me is my brother with another mother, Coach 24, Darwin Penny. How are you doing, sir?
It is a good day. Happy Thursday to everyone, and we're excited to be back in the studio.
Absolutely. Had a great Thanksgiving, and behind the scenes for us, the producer of our show, DJ Scatter, George Walker. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, this is a great day, and I am doing fantastic.
All right, that sounds great. Now, we have Bob Kendrick as a guest, and he is running a little behind, so we will go on with other subjects until he gets here. So, saying that, we had Thanksgiving, so with Thanksgiving, you have football. We had three pretty good games. All of them had winning records, and the only one that didn't have it was Detroit, and they had the longest winning streak out of all six of those teams and nearly beat Buffalo. But the Dallas New York Giants game was really impressive by the fact that it had the most audience in a regular season game ever. And so that was pretty good considering the fact that Dallas was pretty much whooping up on the Giants.
Well, we have come to the realizations that love them or hate them, you're going to watch them. And so the star on the side of that helmet has always been very polarizing and magnetizing to people. Some people like myself who are avid Cowboy fans are always going to watch. Dallas has an expansive base, which is evident in that it is the most valuable sports franchise in all of professional sports. And then there's another group of people that are like, I'm tired of the Cowboys. I'm tired of seeing them on there. They give them names, cowgirls, whatever. And so, but they're going to watch in hopes that they're just going to beat them. But I think it also speaks to the amount of people that love to watch football, and it is part of a tradition of having your Thanksgiving dinner there with your family and being able to watch the game. But certainly if it's a game that has value where you had two 7-3 teams coming in, I think that also added value. It's the primetime game. It's once you've had the turkey and the dressing and all of that in you, and it's the game on. And so, and I thought people wanted to see if the Giants were for real. Could Dallas follow up on that impressive performance that they'd had against the Vikings, or whether they're going to look like they did against the Packers and potentially give that game away. Certainly they had a lot to play for in trying to keep pace with the Eagles, and then that gives them a little bit of a mini bye to have another 10 days before you have to play again.
Absolutely. So what's your assessment of the Cowboys game?
It's been a roller coaster ride. I thought they played just well enough. after having a short week to go in. I never really doubted that they would beat the Giants. I don't think the Giants are totally the sum of what their record says. They had won a few games by happenstance. Again, the league and how it generates its schedule generates it that if you finish in a certain place within your division, you're going to play somebody else who finished in an identical place in that division. And so it gives you a chance to get back up to the parity that the league has always desired, because unlike baseball, when you can get halfway through the season and more than half of the teams have no chance of being able to compete or to get into the playoffs, the majority of the NFL will still have a mathematical chance going into weeks 15, 16, 17. And so I thought it was a good game, though. The Giants came out and continued to play spirited. They're moving forward. What was, people used to make the joke of the NFC least is no longer the NFC least, where everybody has a winning record in the division. Now the NFC South is the doormat of the league, where there's nobody with a winning record. And so it was a good game. I think the Giants are not quite ready yet. I base games these days on who's playing quarterback. Still a quarterback-driven league, and whoever has the best quarterback tends to win those games if that quarterback plays up to their capability. I think Dak is starting to round into shape. If you look at since he's come back, they have been one of the more productive offenses in the league, actually have led the league in scoring. They're only behind Kansas City in those since week 7. As far as total yards, the defense has continued to play well throughout. Maybe not as quite dominant as they were during the Cooper Rush time, but they're still playing well. They're getting sacks, and then last week the last 2 games they were able to slow up the running games of the Giants and the Vikings, where they had allowed 3 straight games of 200-plus yards a game rushing. And so with that, with the whole Odell sweepstakes and everything else, it's just been a crazy roller coaster ride for the Cowboys.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, moving over to OBJ, right, for the moment, I don't see his interest. Now, I remember when a couple of weeks ago I thought, okay, Kansas City can get him. That would be really cool. But the more it's lingered on, the more it's just kind of boring. And I think all he wants is attention. And, and there are people who get that attention, and he has deserved it at some times. But right now, he hasn't played in almost a year, and he is on the north side of 30. He's on the south side of 30.
Yeah, he just turned 30, and so the biggest challenge is, how do I keep myself relevant until I get healthy? Well, social media allows me to stay relevant when I'm not healthy. At the end of the day, that's what everybody's waiting on. Are you healthy? Are you able to go out and you're able to perform? Are you able to cut? You've got a surgically repaired knee that's been repaired twice now. And so I've got to drum up some type of interest, and they've been able to do that. And so he's made himself relevant, and now he's starting to visit. He visited with the Giants today. He's going to visit with Buffalo tomorrow, and he's going to visit with the Cowboys on Monday, in hopes that somebody would offer him some type of long-term contract, at least a couple of years beyond this. He's a family man with a wife and kids, and how do I get to a place on the back end of my career where he's still probably got 3 to 4 good years left in him to say, I'd like to be in a place where I can settle my family down and raise my kid, at least enough till my career is over, and then maybe go back to his Louisiana roots, where he's from, growing up there in the Baton Rouge, New Orleans area.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think he is ever going to be a number 1 wide receiver?
Depends on who he's playing for. Would he be a number 1 on the Chiefs? No. Would he be a number 1 on the Cowboys? No. If he's playing on less than a contender, yeah. I mean, if he were to go to, let's say, a Jacksonville or somewhere like that, he could possibly still be a number one receiver. But we won't know until we get him out on the field and see what happened. What you don't want, if you're the Cowboys, is to feel like you have to force the ball to him when you have invested in a young receiver like CeeDee Lamb, who will be eventually coming back up for a long-term deal. And you want to make sure that you give him every opportunity to do that. Last week, for the first time, Michael Gallup started to look like Michael Gallup. His asset would be, could he be a third receiver that could play either inside or outside, depending on where you really want to play CeeDee Lamb, which I think he plays best when he's inside. And so, but are you going to break up the continuity that seems to be evolving with Dak and CD over the last 2 to 3 weeks, where they're moving forward as an offense, where they're looking complete, where they have a running game to complement the passing game. And like I said, Dak is just now starting to really get his rhythm, because he didn't play in preseason. He played one game and then he was out for 6 weeks.
Right.
And so do you really want to mess up that? And then with their young players now going to be coming up for long-term contract opportunities, do you want to invest that in somebody who's a 30-year-old receiver who's probably still going to command a high price that he was used to getting paid prior to being injured? And so the Rams are not a factor. And so at the end of the day, I think he wants to be in a place that gives him an opportunity to win, but also gives him a chance to stay in the limelight. He's played in New York, and he's played in L.A. Cleveland is where quarterbacks and receivers go to die. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this, what's your odds-on favorite on the team that he will sign with?
My odds-on favorite still would be the Cowboys. But each day, I think that goes down. James Washington also looking like he's ready to come off the physically unable to perform list. So that was a guy that they had invested into in the offseason from Pittsburgh to see if he could be a complement to the 1-2 punch of Gallup and CeeDee Lamb, not knowing how Gallup was going to respond coming off a season-ending injury in the playoff game. And so he was insurance. You still have a solid receiver in Noah Brown. He's not elite, but he's a solid guy. And Dak has always been a guy who's been able to get the ball to the tight ends. We saw that in the game on Thanksgiving. 3 tight ends caught balls, 4 tight ends played. 2 of them scored touchdowns. Dalton Schultz has really come alive over the last 3 weeks. He seems to be healthy, and he's always had a great rapport with Dak when it comes to the passing game.
Absolutely. So, and I totally agree with you with the chemistry. You know, you bring in somebody, and sometimes you worry about that. You know, Tony from Kansas City, you know, he came in, and then he responded well, and then he got hurt again. So, which has been his forte, unfortunately. So hopefully he can get out of that. But so with Dallas, I kind of moved over to Kansas City, because now Kansas City, who Brett Veach really does not, you know, make a lot of moves, has made a lot of moves the last few weeks. They brought in Melvin Gordon. They brought in Brandon Williams. They even they got rid of two offensive linemen. One of them was the Ryder, the center that they brought in for that was the Super Bowl champs, and he is not there now. So with that, how is Kansas City moving forward to helping them get to the playoffs?
Well, I think the biggest thing Kansas City was still trying to address, because they have such an elite thrower at quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, was could they get him some type of complementary running game that was going. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you've gone with McKinnon. There's been a lot, but now Pacheco has asserted himself as the lead back. And where were you going to get some help? Was a Melvin Gordon? I certainly was surprised at that move, because at the end of the day, he still has issues with laying the ball on the turf. But in short yardage, he has always been good in short yardage as far as the power that he brings that maybe a Pacheco and the other backs that are more pass receiving backs don't bring to the table, because you don't want to always have to rely on Mahomes to throw the ball on third and fourth and short. It becomes too predictable at that point. And so I just think that Kansas City is trying to do all that it can, because at the end of the day, you're in a position where you're going to always have quality at quarterback, but at some point in time, will you be able to assemble all the other parts, right? The good thing is on defense, they're relatively young, especially on the back end of the defense, and that allows you to disperse that money into different avenues and different positions. And so you don't want to overpay it running back. I just, with them, my investment would continue to be either on the back end of the secondary to get a veteran to help walk those young players through on the back end. And then I think the running game issue is solved. I don't think they need much more at receiver unless there is an injury.
Right. So with that, I have my top 10 list for this week, my power rankings. Mm-hmm. And I've got Kansas City's 1. I've got Philadelphia 2, Dallas 3, Buffalo 4, Minnesota 5, San Francisco 6, Miami 7, Cincinnati 8, Tennessee 9, and Baltimore 10. Do you agree, or is there some changes in there that you would make?
I'm good with the first three. I would take the 49ers probably to the 4th spot. Would probably drop the Vikings down a few spots just because of their point differential at how they won their games. And winning is just winning, right? If you win by 1 point or you win by 30, you still get a win.
Right.
But I think they have struggled. Buffalo has not been impressive to me since the Chiefs' victory. They've won, but it's been the same. Philly, you have to respect not only their record but how they played. Last week I thought was a very good win for them in beating the Packers, who all of a sudden showed some life when they played the Cowboys. But at the end of the day, I think the top 4 teams are the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Cowboys. San Francisco has not given up a second half points in 4 consecutive weeks.
Right.
And so defensively, they're as good as anybody in the league. And that's why I would put them ahead of Minnesota. I would put them ahead of also probably everybody else. I would also put Miami ahead of the Vikings. They have been really, really consistent with their offense whenever Tua has been healthy. When they have had Tua at quarterback, only Kansas City has scored more points on a consistent basis than they have. They've played solid defense, maybe not the elite defense, but they've played solid defense. But their offense has been hard to deal with for the entire season with Tua. He's throwing at a 70% accuracy rate, and a lot of the negative connotations that were out there to him, and he's always hurt, and he's just a college quarterback. He's starting to put some of those things to rest.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
but overall, I think you got the top 10 right. I don't think there's anybody in that top 10 that I would say, no, this team needs to be in, and the order is where we would differ a little.
Right. And here's the thing with Baltimore. I've got them at 10, and I would have moved them up higher, except for they lost to Jacksonville. And here was the thing. I did my show Sunday, and I was so back and forth. I was like, I want to pick Jacksonville, but then I picked Houston to beat Washington the week before, and so I didn't want to do that. But I was like, and I told people, I said, look, if Jacksonville beats them, yeah, I was thinking that. So here's the thing.
I got one other team that I left out that should be ahead of the Vikings too, the Bengals. The Bengals are playing really, really well, and we're going to find out how well they're playing this weekend.
Yes, absolutely. So let's get into this game. Okay, because after this week, really Kansas City, for a say, is going to kind of stroll through the league. Now, no team is even if they're not a great team, they're still they're still an NFL team, and they can be beaten any given Sunday, which is our name. But saying that, this is the game that Kansas City has, circled. Buffalo circled the Chiefs. Dallas may circle a certain team or something. Well, this is Kansas City's team that they're circling. Joe Burrow is undefeated against Patrick Mahomes, and if the Cincinnati Bengals win this game, you have to think, okay, what is Cincinnati doing that nobody else is doing to stop the Kansas City Chiefs?
Well, I think more than anything else is they've been able to control the pace of the game. They haven't tried to outscore Kansas City. They've just tried to beat them. They've played really well, and they played really well in the second half. Both games that they beat Kansas City last year, the Chiefs only scored 3 points in the second half of the game. And so they are very, very underrated defensively, what they're able to do. They do have firepower offensively. Joe Burrow is cool as the other side of the pillow, as my man Stuart Scott used to say. And he didn't get rattled when he got down in the game. And so they've stayed to their game plan. They haven't panicked. Most teams, when they play the Chiefs and they get behind, they scratch their game plan and then all of a sudden try to outscore the Chiefs, and that's just going to get you in a battle that you can't. And they were the ones who were able to have the ball last. Everybody else who allows Mahomes to have the ball last, he's come up time and time again with being able to close out a game, whether it was a minute left or 30 seconds left. Buffalo has found themselves always trying to get into that shootout with the Chiefs, whereas I think their ability to control the clock a little bit with Mixon in the running game has allowed them to make a formidable opponent against the Chiefs.
And you'll have to excuse me for a second because I've got Bob Kendrick on the phone, and I was looking for George Walker, and maybe he's already outside with him. Are you there, Bob?
Yeah, I'm outside.
Oh, okay. George should be walking out there any moment. So,
Okay.
all right, we'll see you shortly.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. So I apologize for that delay. Yeah, he walked outside. I'm hoping that he is checking it out. So anyway, saying that, who do you think is going to win Sunday?
Because of where the game is being played, I'm going to, forgive me, Kansas City fans, I'm going to go with the Bengals.
And you know what? I feel the exact same way. It's kind of like, as I always say, I'm from the show me state. You got to show me. So Cincinnati, until Kansas City proves that they can beat Cincinnati. And how are you doing, sir? So we have a special guest.
Absolutely. His theme music is already playing as he comes in.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a break, and so we can get Mr. Kendrick sorted out and ready for us. So quick break. You're listening to Any Given Sunday on KUAW. How you doing? Okay, and we are back. Any given Sunday, Coach 24 Darwin Penny, George Walker, awesome voice, and our guest, Mr. Bob Kendrick. How are you doing, sir?
Brian, man, I'm good. It's good to see you both, Mr. Penny. How are you, sir?
Good. Every time you say Miss Penny, I keep looking for my daddy through the door. But I appreciate you. Always good to see you, my brother.
So I am truly honored, as Darwin is, that you are on our show, and I'll tell you, I truly appreciate the fact that you are a friend of mine, and but I have to ask, how was turning the lights on?
It was pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty special, and it was even more special for me because I got to share that moment with my 11-year-old granddaughter. Oh. Yeah, and so she got to come on stage with the grandpa and help turn the lights on, and this was her first time doing something in front of a crowd of that size. Mm-hmm. And so she was pretty nervous, and she grabbed me before we went on stage. She said, "Grandpa, I'm scared." I said, "Well, baby, what you scared of? It's a lot of people out there." She said, "Don't you get scared?" I said, "No, just go on stage, smile big, and wave. That's your job."
There you go.
That's your job. And then our job collectively, and we ain't gonna mess this up, is just to flip the switch.
So with that, you had your granddaughter, and I get that, because a few weeks ago I met Bo Jackson. Mm-hmm. I got a picture taken. Well, my son and my grandson got to meet him too, and got the picture with all four of us, and I wasn't sure how my grandson was going to react, because I just thought, he's a grandkid. He was excited. I mean, he was beaming from ear to ear. He was like, "Oh my gosh!"
No. She was big girl on campus this week.
Oh,
as you can well imagine.
There you go.
So I think by the time we left the event, I'm kind of gathering that she was like, "You know what, Grandpa? I could get used to this."
There you go. There you go. Someone to take over for you later on. There you go. That's awesome. So let me ask you this. Buck O'Neil did this in '96.
Yeah.
How do you compare that with how you did it?
Well, and I remember this in 1996, and the Plaza Association still had the photograph of Buck the night that he flipped the light switch, and Buck came out wearing his full-length mink coat.
That's
He had the full-length fur on, and so when it was announced that I would be kind of following in his footsteps, I said, well, I don't know if I'll channel my inner Buck O'Neil, because I don't have a fur coat. And the folks over at Alaskan Fur heard that, and they said, well, we can help you out with that. And it just turned out that the weather was so good that I couldn't wear a full-length fur, but they hooked me up with a fur jacket.
There you go.
And so to follow in Buck's footsteps, you can't feel his enormous shoes. You would be naive to think that you could step in and feel his shoes. But I don't mind walking in his footsteps. Right. I have no problem with that. A lot of folks would kind of cave in to the weight of his shadow looming over you. I don't look at it like that. I look at it as if his shadow is protecting me. Yeah. And so when I walk in his footsteps, he's guiding those footsteps. And so to kind of come in, years after he flipped the switch, and now for me to have that opportunity to represent my team at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, the rich history of what we document there at the museum, and to carry on his spirit. Yeah, that meant something. It wasn't lost on me how important that moment in time was, not just for me, my family, but for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum family altogether.
So did all of the museum team, were they all out there?
We had some of our team there. The others decided, I'm going to stay at home and watch you on TV. as opposed to trying to get in all that traffic.
You know what? I seriously thought I've never even attempted to go out there, but I was seriously thinking about coming out there because I wanted to see you turn the lights on and all that. But then I would have realized it would have taken me forever to get back out of it.
And I would be remiss if I didn't thank the folks over at Evergy and the Country Club Plaza for being such gracious hosts to me and my family and other members of my staff who came to be part of this. It was a very special evening, and it was just a beautiful night. It was a beautiful November night, and so it'll be something that I will remember for a long time. And like I said, to have that experience with my granddaughter, I know that she will remember that for years to come. And you know what? Some years later, she will likely take her children down to the plaza lighting ceremony and say, you know, your great grandpa flipped the light, and you know, I helped him flip the lights.
There you go.
And so, you know, it's always about making memories.
Yep.
It really is. It's about making memories.
So let me ask you this. How does turning the lights on benefit the museum moving forward?
Well, you know, not only was it an opportunity to flip the switch to usher in the holiday season, 93rd annual Plaza Lighting Ceremony. So this is a Kansas City tradition, and there are some tremendous notable folks who have flipped that switch. I don't know how they got Bob Kendrick. But to be in that company. But if you also drive through the plaza, you will see Buck O'Neill flags flying as you go down Cleaver Boulevard, 47th Street. You'll see Buck O'Neill flags flying, the Thanks a Million Buck. And so it just serves as a reminder that you have this great museum in historic 18th and Vine, that hopefully it will encourage other folks. Now, I got to come. And we were bristling with activity the days after Thanksgiving, both through the entire course of the weekend, Friday and Saturday. There were a lot of people coming through, a lot of people in town, a lot of people obviously were there at the lighting ceremony. They're hearing the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum mentioned with regularity, and all of a sudden they say, you know what, I need to go down there and check this out. And it serves as a reminder for those at home who haven't been yet to get down and experience what we have to offer at Historic 18th and Vine. You guys both know it's rare that we become tourists in our own cities.
Right.
We go other places and pay for the exact same experience, but we don't do it at home because we have a tendency to take those things for granted. I'm just as guilty as anyone else. You know, I only went to the Truman Library when the late, great General Colin Powell was there. And he was serving on our advisory board. It was an opportunity for me to meet him. That is what ultimately got me there. And people in New York, they see the Statue of Liberty every day. And so many of them have never gone. And so my job is to try to encourage folks to get it off of this, I will do this someday, and get active and do it today. And that's what we're always trying to do. And I do think a ceremony, celebration like what we saw Thanksgiving will certainly help that process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I would concur on that. It's been amazing to me, and I've only been in Kansas City now for 5+ years. When I would encounter somebody who would say that to me, that I've never, it's hard for me to believe, because in talking about what we do at the Urban Youth Academy, it always coincides with the Negro League Museum. And then hopefully one day when we have the Buck O'Neill Educational Center alongside of that, but to ask them, have you been there? Or even have you been to the Jazz Museum?
Exactly.
And everything. And people will say, no, I'm embarrassed to say. And I'm not talking about just an average Kansas City, and I'm talking about people who are baseball fans.
Yeah, yeah.
And to say that you haven't been to the museum. And so that warms my heart to hear some people to say, okay, you know what, because of the lighting ceremony and because of the opportunity to hear Mr. Kendrick talk about it, I'm gonna make it a point to go down there. And because, like I said, I've taken friends of mine that I've met here who you've never been.
Let's go.
Let's get you over there to know that history there. Because one thing I want people to always remember is, because of what transpired there with Rube Foster, is as Bob always says, it's not just baseball history. It's not African American history. It's American history.
Yeah.
And how can you be in the epicenter of America in Kansas City and not take in a piece of that history.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's always the constant quest is you want locals to embrace what you're doing. We've got people coming from around the globe and certainly people coming from all across the country each and every year to experience. They can't wait to get to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Many of them are coming to Kansas City specifically to see the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. But you do want people at home to also embrace you and feel that same way. And I'm not saying that they don't, because anytime that something goes on, there's a level of civic pride to say, you know, we got the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum here in Kansas City. Now, they may not have been, but they are proud of the fact that we've got a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. I just got to activate them. I got to continue to activate them to come and experience it, embrace it, become a member, support it. You know, because I remind people all the time, culture and heritage are not free. They're not free. They have to be protected. They have to be supported because they serve as the gap in American history books. There's a huge gap in the pages of American history books. And as I remind people every day, there are so many who have contributed to the greatness of this country, and their stories have never been properly told. The Negro Leagues is one of those great stories. And so when people come there, they cannot believe. It's like, how in the world did I not know this? I mean, it would seem impossible, a story of this magnitude, that we could all go through our formal educations without knowing anything about it. So unless you had somebody, your grandfather, sat you down and told you about it, or in my case, I stumbled into it when I become a volunteer at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and man, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just fell in love with it. I mean, it was literally love at first sight, and at that point, I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody to feel the same way I felt about it, and here I was, and you just mentioned it, I was a baseball fan. I was a baseball fan and didn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't. I've learned, you know, just Darwin Penny is the reason that I have gotten into with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and everything else, because we've hung out and I've learned so much. I've been here in Kansas City since I was 3 years old. I mean, you know, and you go, you know, you're dumbfounded because you did what? I did not know that.
No,
I was like,
do.
oh my gosh.
Yeah,
you know?
no, it was such an awakening for me. It really was. You know, I knew the names Satchel Paige and Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson. Most baseball fans have at least heard those names. Now, they may not know just how great these players really were, but you likely heard their names because of all the lore and legend that surround those names.
Right.
But I had no idea about the breadth, the depth, the scope, the magnitude that this history represented both on and off the field. And the off the field aspect may be even more important than what we saw on the field, because if you were to talk to any of the players from the Negro Leagues, there was never any doubt in their minds about their ability to play this game. They knew they could play this game. And quite frankly, the major leaguers knew they could play this game. This was about job security. You know, those players were trying to protect what they thought were theirs. I remind people, when Jackie Robinson joined the Brooklyn Dodgers, he took somebody's job. He took somebody's job, and he took the job of a friend. So now the other guys are looking over their shoulders wondering, oh, hell, am I next?
You next?
Am I next? And so they knew they could play. The major leaguers knew that they could play. You know, but again, they wanted to prove to the world that they were as good as anyone to ever play this game. But when you dive deeper into the story, baseball is merely a premise for a far more grandiose story. You know, this is a story about the importance of economic empowerment. This is a story about an unprecedented level of leadership that emerged in the African American community with the formulation of these teams. Now you've got owners and all these executives who are living in the same community that I'm living in, and they're making an impact in those communities. And then ultimately, this is about the social advancement of America, as again, as you both know, Jackie Robinson was handpicked from the great Kansas City Monarchs to be the guy that would break Major League Baseball's 6-decade-long self-imposed color barrier. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So when you look at it from that standpoint, you can see why I always say that this story is much bigger than the game of baseball, yet it's still just a tiny part of the great story of the game of baseball.
Yeah.
If you know the history of baseball, you essentially know the history of this country.
Yeah.
They are that closely aligned.
Absolutely. When you look at how the importance of baseball as it had gone through its Black Sox scandal in 1919, which is right at the end of World War I, and America needed something to get it back on its feet. It's the same thing in 1947 when Jackie Robinson, it's just after World War II, and we need something to get us back up as a country, something that we can look forward to take our mind off of all these things that have transpired. It was perfect timing when you go back and look at it. And so to be able to be a part of that history. But the thing that I always gather from the museum, every time I go to the museum, I learn something new, and they've done such a great job of presenting more and more information as they've been able to gather it, and it becomes harder and harder now because we don't have those players around to tell those stories, and now we have to have things that document that these guys were here, what they did, what they contributed, and then to hear names like he said, the names were easy when you talk about Jackie and you talk about Satchel and you talk about Josh Gibson. But I had no idea of how great a pitcher Hilton Smith was until coming here and to know what he was.
From Giddings, Texas.
Well, they keep talking. Well, Texas, and me being a proud Texan that I am, we have a huge impact because the founder of Negro League Baseball, Rube Foster, was from Calvert, Texas. I still trying to figure out a way that I can be kin to him.
Well, you
some
probably
kind of way because my great grandfather, that's where he sharecropped, is right outside of Calvert in that little area. There's a little area called Maysville, and so I'm trying to figure out some way we got to be kidding Rube Foster. Everybody cousins back in Smallville,
But
Texas.
you mentioned something when you mentioned the Black Sox scandal, and that is what ultimately led to Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis becoming the commissioner of Major League Baseball. And Landis certainly was a staunch segregationist, and he had vowed that as long as he was the commissioner, there would never be a black man playing in the major leagues. But what I find to be so interesting, Landis installed for himself the unilateral power of the commissioner to overturn the owner's vote. He put that in as he was governing over the Black Sox scandal so that he could have that kind of power to try and clean this thing up. It would be that same installation of power that would ultimately lead us to Jackie Robinson. Because when Landis dies, the owners end up selecting a new commissioner by the name of Al Happy Chandler.
Yes,
Happy Chandler was a white Southerner from Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah.
They thought they had their guy who would maintain what had essentially been a 6-decade self-imposed segregationist mindset to our game. Well, Happy Chandler was nothing like the owners thought he was. And it will be Chandler who would use the power that Landis had installed to overturn the owners' vote when they voted against Jackie Robinson getting into the major leagues. They voted 15-1 not to allow Robinson to play, and Chandler overturned the ruling. And that's why I tell people all the time, Branch Rickey and Happy Chandler had to have had a backroom handshake in place that essentially said, if the owners vote against this, I will overturn it. Because there is no way that Rickey, being as astute as he was, going to walk into a meeting when you already know the deck is stacked against you? Why in the world would you allow that to go to vote? You know you have no shot without having the assurance that Chandler was going to overturn the vote. And he did just that. He executed his power, and that's how we get Jackie Robinson. It's just an amazing story. And we've been examining, you know, as you both know, I do this crazy podcast with Sirius XM Radio called Black Diamonds.
Yep.
And we've been examining integration of baseball and the ramifications of integration of baseball, because it was certainly a sign of progress, but there was a lot lost when we lost the Negro Leagues. I don't know if black folks realize what we were losing when we lost the Negro Leagues. And it's just fascinating because, you know, as we've tried to look at Branch Rickey, and I tell people, Branch Rickey, while he has been hailed as being this very righteous individual, and don't get me wrong, I think there was a degree of righteousness in him. We all have some of that in us.
Right.
But Rickey was somewhere between a saint and a devil. Now, I'll let y'all figure out which one he was and where he falls into the equation. But Rickey wanted to come into the Negro Leagues and essentially raided of his star talent without any compensation to those Negro League owners. Yeah. He had no respect for Negro League contracts. He was just literally going to come in and take that talent out of the Negro Leagues and not pay the owners anything. I remind folks that James Leslie Wilkinson, J.L. Wilkinson, who owned the Kansas City Monarchs, never got paid, as my mother would say, not one red cent for a guy who was actually under contract. He took Jackie Robinson away from the Kansas City Monarchs. And it's a really intricate kind of story because Robinson, as you know, wasn't his first choice.
No.
His first choice was the great Monty Irvin.
Yes.
Who you got to know.
Yes, sir.
Monty Irvin, as Buck would describe, was a beautiful ball player. Monty Irvin was a five-tool guy with movie star good looks. He had superstardom written all over him.
Right.
And Monty had just gotten back from World War II. And he was suffering what he would acknowledge at that time as shell shock. Today, of course, we would call it post-traumatic syndrome.
Right.
He was also having contract squabbles, however, with Effa Manley. Effa Manley was a woman who owned the Newark Eagles. And to say that Effa Manley couldn't stand Branch Rickey,
That'd be an understatement.
that would be an understatement. She did not care for Branch Rickey because she saw exactly what Rickey was going to do. So Rickey had actually snuck and signed Monty Irvin in 1945 before he gets Jackie Robinson. But Mrs. Manley was prepared to fight back. She was going to litigate. He knew he did not need this kind of public fight. And so he backs off of Monty Irvin, who, again, not to disparage Jackie Robinson, Monty Irvin was a far better baseball player than Jackie Robinson.
Right.
Jackie Robinson is a Hall of Fame baseball player, but that's just how good Monty Irvin was. Right. I wish Major League Baseball had gotten Monty Irvin when he was 20, 21 years old. There was nothing he couldn't do on a baseball field. And so she was going to fight. He didn't need this. So he backs off of Monty Irvin. That's when he turns his sight to Kansas City and one Jackie Roosevelt Robinson. Well, here's how astute Rickey was and how shrewd Rickey was. He knew that the Monarchs owner couldn't fight back.
Right, because he was white.
He was white. And there was no way that this white man who made his entire living in black baseball can be the public face of preventing what every black person in America had been waiting on for a black man to play in the major leagues. If he were to do it, that black fan base that had been so loyal to him, they would have turned their backs right away. And so he had Wilkie in that, between that proverbial rock and hard place, and Rickey knew this. Yeah, and so publicly, Wilkie said all the right things because you got to protect your business interests. Privately, he is seething.
Oh, I imagine.
And he is not seething because a black man's about to play in the major leagues, but this black man that you're about to take away from me, you're going to put me out of business.
Who wants valuable commodities taken from them without any type of compensation?
Right.
But he has to do that. We also know that how important Mr. Wilkinson was to the movement not only of Negro League baseball, but Major League Baseball as a whole when we start talking about night
baseball, yeah.
This is long before Major League Baseball.
5 years before.
And so this is a huge, huge opportunity to not only continue to try to cement his place, but let's talk about it for what it was. This is a moneymaker.
It's a moneymaker.
You take money out of my pocket.
And Wilkie got ripped off. He really did. And he saw the handwriting on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, he knew. It wasn't a matter of if the business of Negro Leagues were going to die. It was a matter of when they were going to die. And so he sells his interest in the Monarchs to his business partner, a guy named T.Y. Baird. And I tell people, man, you can't make this stuff up. It is too good. It is too good. T.Y. Baird was a known Kansas City, Kansas Ku Klux Klansman.
Oh my
who
God.
made his living in black baseball.
Oh wow.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. I'm telling you, man, the TV series is writing itself. Somebody come and do this and make old Bob the executive producer.
There you go. There you go. Hey, you got Netflix, you got Peacock, you got all those.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to happen. It has to happen. The content, we're a content-driven media world now with all of these places that you talk to where once upon a time you were just dependent on the three main networks and the big screen. But now you've got all these other places that are starving for content, and I do think it's going to happen at some point in time. And as I tell people all the time, you don't have to fictionalize the story of the Negro Leagues to make it entertaining. Just tell the real story. It's entertaining in its own right.
There you go.
Yeah, and so Wilkie bowed out gracefully, and then slowly but surely, the other owners just started to, really started to try and sell their star players to the major leagues. And the reason they were able to do that goes, again, back to Effa Manley. When Bill Veeck comes calling a few months later to get a young Larry Doby, Larry Doby, a name that should be a household name, but it's not.
But it's not.
No, because that's how we are as a society. We remember the first guy.
Don't remember number two.
We never remember number two.
No.
No, we never remember number two. And so Bill Veeck comes to get Larry Doby. He comes offering Effa Manley $5,000. Effa Manley writes to Mr. Veeck and says, now, Mr. Veeck, you know, if Larry Doby was white, he'd be worth over $100,000. Now, if you think this $5,000 is fair, she at this point knows she's not going to be able to fend them off long.
Right.
There was blood in the water, and the sharks were coming. And she said, if you think this is fair, then I guess I have no choice. Bill Veeck, who had a heart for the Negro Leagues anyway, he had already tried to buy the Philadelphia team and had said that he was going to fill it with players from the Negro Leagues, stars from the Negro Leagues, and Landis nixed the deal. You're like, oh no, we ain't doing that. And so Veeck says, I will give you another $5,000, and I will give Larry $5,000 if he makes the team. That's how Negro League owners started to eventually get paid. So now it's a fire sale. It is literally a fire sale. Try to develop, groom, sell as quickly as possible so that we can make whatever we can make before the business of Negro League dies. Now, some Negro League teams thought that they might become kind of a minor league system. It was never going to happen. No. It was never going to happen. They didn't need them. Right. Because now if you were an aspiring young black or brown player, you could bypass the Negro Leagues and move right into the Major Leagues minor league system. So you didn't need the Negro Leaguers anymore. I tell people all the time, the Negro Leagues were so good that they put themselves out of business.
Yes. To Bob's point, Buzz Aldrin.
Buzz Aldrin.
Yeah.
That's how Larry Doby.
Don't nobody talk about Buzz Aldrin. He's the second man to walk on the moon.
And Buzz walked on the moon just seconds after Neil Armstrong.
But don't nobody remember number 2.
And Larry Doby is our Buzz Aldrin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've shared that with many people and talking about Larry Doby, and he wasn't as old and as mature as Jackie going in, so he was having to deal with a whole nother level of just maturing as a person, as an individual, on top of having to be a top-level baseball player. He faced everything that Jackie faced.
And maybe even more.
Maybe even more.
Maybe even more for the points that you just mentioned. Larry Doby, guys, was 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a baby.
Right.
Thrown into, as I like to say, a powder keg of racism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when he walked into the Cleveland Indians locker room, nobody would shake his hand.
Nope.
No one wanted to warm up with him. He's 23 years old. Yeah, now he had served in the military too. He went to the Navy, but he's 23 years old. He's just a baby.
Right.
Yeah, and the national media was following Jackie.
Right.
And Brooklyn was a major urban center. Now, Cleveland certainly had its fair share of black folks, but it wasn't Brooklyn. Cleveland, in many ways, was still like being in the South. And no one was paying Doby any attention.
Let me ask you this question, Bob, and correct me if I'm wrong. He also did not get the benefit of playing a year in the minors.
No, he went straight from the Newark
Jackie
Eagles.
got.
He went straight from the Newark Eagles over to Cleveland, and the very next year, he and the old man, Satchel Paige, helped Cleveland win. And my Cleveland fans get tired of hearing me say this, the last World Series that Cleveland has won, 1948. Yeah. And Doby, he never played a day in the minor leagues.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's, to me, a huge part, because Jackie got a year of playing with the Montreal Royals, got to play with teammates who didn't want him, but also got a chance to prove himself.
Yeah.
Whereas Larry Doby was thrust in. Here it is 2 months after Jackie broke in, and boom, you got to go, brother.
And those first few months he was there, he struggled.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I tell people, guys, those Negro League players who transition into the major leagues and didn't succeed, it had nothing to do with talent. It had more to do with their inability to deal with a social environment where they really weren't wanted to be there. You know, everything was a challenge. You couldn't just focus on baseball. You know, everything was a challenge for those players. And so the ones who did make it, they had a little extra, as I would say, intestinal fortitude that allowed them to push all of that aside and still stay laser focused on the task at hand. And so, those guys all caught it, which is one of the reasons why this year we debuted a new exhibition called Barrier Breakers.
Yes.
And the Barrier Breaker exhibit chronicles all of the players who broke their respective major league teams' color barriers. So starting with Jackie Robinson joining Brooklyn in 1947 through a player by the name of Elijah Pumpsie Green, who would become the last player to complete the integration cycle. It took 12 years. 12 years later with the Boston Red Sox. So the Red Sox were the last team to integrate in 1959. And as I tell people, it didn't get any easier for Pumpsie Green 12 years later in Boston than it did for Jackie in Brooklyn. They all went through their trials and tribulations as they were trying to blaze a path to pursue their major league careers. And so we wanted to tell that story so that they wouldn't be forgotten. Yeah, no, they deserve to be more than just a footnote in baseball and American history. And I just wholeheartedly believe that if the Negro League Baseball Museum doesn't tell these stories, who will?
Yeah, because if you take a piece of the story, you think that Jackie goes in, and then immediately everybody else
it's all good now.
No, that everybody else had Negro players as well.
Right.
No, here we are 12 years later, still trying to be accepted. At the same time, Negro League Baseball is still trying to operate as best as it can to give. But it was able to give us this next generation of players that dominate the 60s.
Right.
When you go back in and look at the MVPs of the late 50s and the early 60s, it was dominated by players who had cut their teeth in Negro League at the back end of Negro League, not at the height of Negro League baseball, but at the back end when you started talking about the Mazes and the Aarons,
the Banks,
and all these guys who come in and literally dominate Major League Baseball. But these guys were able to cut their teeth, get some seasoning, get a little bit of minor league seasoning, and then you're looking at Mays and Aaron, who guys were 20-year-olds breaking into Major League Baseball and then coming in and dominate.
Yeah, no. I mean, Hank Aaron told me when he left Mobile, Alabama, to go join the Indianapolis Clowns in 1952. He said, I didn't know if I was leaving home to go play with kids my own age or grown men. He was going to go play with grown men, but he more than acquitted himself. No, he was special. Mm-hmm. But you know what I also admire about the players from the Negro Leagues? Because by 52, you know, these black players knew now there was a chance to get to the major leagues. Mm-hmm. That older black player who was really too old to get to the show, they took care of that young Henry Aaron, that young Willie Mays. They tried as best as they could to shield them from the harshness of what Jim Crow was like. And what I also admire is that those players that we just talked about, Henry Aaron, Willie Mays, Ernie Banks, they never forgot those guys who took care of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that wasn't part of them. And they were prepared. They were as best prepared as you could possibly be to deal with some of the stuff that they had to deal with. And let me tell you, those guys who went through the Sally League, ooh-wee, man, they caught it. I mean, it was rough. The minor leagues were far more challenging than when you got to the show. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those minor leagues, you're playing in those small southern towns, you know, North Carolina and Virginia, places like that. It was harsh, to say the least. And those players, you know, when they look back, they didn't look back too fondly at those moments, but again, it toughened them up so that when they got to the major leagues, they were ready. They had been tested about as much as you could be tested, but, you know, you can't help but admire their will.
Absolutely. And I just want people to listen to these, because I had this conversation with a gentleman in a social media platform when I said, when he tried to say that Negro League baseball was some form of AAA or AA baseball, I said, well, then how did these players who played Negro League baseball come in and dominate the league? And he said, oh, they didn't come in and dominate the league. I said, I want you to listen to these MVPs from the time that Jackie enters in 1947. Jackie Robinson, 1949. Roy Campanella, 1951. Roy Campanella, 1953. Willie Mays, 1954. Roy Campanella, 1955. Don Newcomb, 1956. Hank Aaron, 1957. Ernie Banks, 1958. Ernie Banks, 1959. 1961. Frank Robinson, 1962. Maury Wills, 1965. Willie Mays again, and then Clemente, Cepeda, Bob Gibson, Willie McCovey. If that ain't dominance,
I don't know what it is.
I said, sir, please hear me. That's the National League MVPs for almost 2 decades, that more than 80% of them were guys who were directly affected by Negro League baseball.
Yeah, now, and the American League, please understand, was so slow to integrate. Mm-hmm. The American League came in kicking and screaming. They really didn't want. Boston didn't want a black player. They could have had their pick of the litter of great black talent. And nothing against Mr. Green, who was a 2-time All-Star. But they turned down substantial Hall of Fame talent who the scouts deemed were not good enough to play for the Red Sox. Well, you had ownership and a scouting group that just simply did not want black players. I'll never forget, Larry Doby said he tried to get Cleveland to sign Henry Aaron, Willie Mays, and Ernie Banks. And the scouting report came back and said, Henry Aaron's got a hitch in his swing, Willie Mays can't hit the curve, and Ernie Banks has no range. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So let me ask you this.
Sounds like a setup.
Right. Let me ask you this question on, because I always like to play what could have been. Right, and I know also that the Giants came close to signing Aaron as well. And could you imagine Aaron and Mays and Monty
$50.
Irvin in the same outfield?
Yeah, $50 kept us from seeing that outfield.
But Aaron was signed by the Boston Braves, not the Milwaukee Braves.
Not the Milwaukee Braves.
Right.
He never played, but he never played in Boston.
Right. Do you think the Red Sox, had the Braves stayed in Boston, would have maybe been quicker
No doubt.
to sign
A
an
black
African
player.
American
I
player.
think so. I think they would have felt even more pressure to do so.
Yes, sir.
And they only came in 59. It was almost like, oh, hell, everybody else got
Yankees
one.
got one.
We better get one, too. And the Yankees were very slow.
Yes.
They were very slow. Now, they had a good one in Elston Howard.
Yes, sir.
They had a good one. See, but here's what people don't always understand. We, a few years ago, acquired a letter that was written by Larry MacPhail. Larry MacPhail was the managing partner of the New York Yankees. The year is 1945. New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, the guy that the airport is named for, he and others were pushing hard for integration of our game. And so the mayor had put together a commission to examine integration. Well, MacPhail was vehemently against integration. And in this letter, which is called the MacPhail Memorandum, he spells out why integration is such a bad idea. And to be honest, within the body of the letter, there are some things that had some legitimacy. For instance, he would say, if we sign Negro League players, we will put the Negro Leagues out of business. Well, that was going to be a natural byproduct of what was going to occur with this transition. So he's right there. He goes on and says, well, you know, these players are under contract. We just can't come in and take them away from their teams. He's right again. Now, Branch Rickey didn't believe that, but overall, he's right. Then he'd say something completely asinine. He said, you know, they lack the faculties to play in our league. Now, I don't know when you had to be a Rhodes Scholar to play baseball. But here's the interesting dynamics of this. Over 40% of the athletes who played in the Negro Leagues had some level of college education. Less than 5% of those who played in the major leagues at that same time had any college education, for the simple reason that the major leagues didn't want you to go to college there. They got you right out of their farm system, and then you work your way. They got you right out of high school and put you in their farm system, and then you work your way to the big leagues. And so here's the Negro Leagues with a disproportionate number of college-educated athletes,
Right,
in comparison to the league that wouldn't let them play. Yet the fact that they didn't have the faculties to play in this league was one of the reasons why they wouldn't want to open up the door for these black players to play in the major leagues. But then he finally gets to the real crux of the matter. In 1945, by the time that MacPhail writes this letter, the New York Yankees fellas had netted over $100,000 from the Negro Leagues.
right, because
$100,000.
because they were using his stadium.
They were using Yankee Stadium. They were using the Yankees affiliate stadium over in Newark and Blues Stadium here in Kansas City, where the Blues were a Yankees minor league affiliate as well.
Right.
$100,000, pretty good money now. $100,000 in 1945, that's got to be the equivalent to several $million dollars. And they didn't have to work to get that money. All they had to do was sign on the dotted line. Yeah, they were in no hurry to see that revenue lost.
That would be the equivalent of $1.6 million today.
And they had to do nothing to get it. Nothing to get it.
Nope.
No.
That's
so they were getting a
so-called free
percentage.
money.
Well, they were getting a percentage of the gate,
Yep.
and likely all of the concession. So no, the Yankees were in no hurry to see integration, and there were other major league teams that were making money from the Negro Leagues because the Negro Leagues were renting their ballparks, and in many of their same ballparks, they were getting outdrawn by those Negro League teams.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I just think it's a fascinating story, and we're giving you bits and pieces of what's behind the players. This is the intricacies of how it all came to be, that players didn't just show up one day and say, I need a tryout. There were a whole lot of things that had to transpire. And then at the end of the day, I always say, follow the money. When you follow the money, you're going to find the real story.
Yeah, no, I tell people all the time, anytime they say it ain't about the money,
It's about the money.
it's always about the money.
Always about the money. Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Everything that we fought for in this very capitalistic society that we have. Wars have been fought over it. The whole Civil War was over economics.
Yeah.
Okay, man, you finna take my free labor.
Yeah.
You know, so same thing is now you're taking away my players with no compensation, or you're putting me in a situation where I'm going to lose compensation because of the facilities that I have and what we're able to do. And so when you always get cut through it, I love that when the player it's not about money. What is it about then? Because you feel love. It's about the love. It's about the respect. When you feel loved and respected when you get compensated. But it is.
Yeah.
It's a great story, and we hope that everyone would take time out of their day, take time out of their weekend to go by and see this great facility
Yes.
and start to learn just a piece of the story. You can't tell it all, but do a good job of what I always say. The best thing that happened to me, it made me even more hungry to know. I always felt like I was fortunate enough, and when Bob and I have had these conversations, that I had an older father. And my father was born in 1920 when Negro League Baseball started. So he grew up knowing about Negro League Baseball. He got to see. He was in the military at the same time that Jackie was in the military. He was stationed at Fort Hood when Jackie got court-martialed there, you know, and then he saw all of the barnstorming games that came along. So he was very, 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 very astute in what was going on at that time, because this is in his early adulthood, and then as he became an adult, to see all of this. And I can remember my dad talking so much about Roy Campanella and how good of a catcher and a player he was, but he also talked about who he was as a person. You know, Campanella had a little bit of a hothead.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
and so he was like, he was like, there are so many players that could have been the first.
Yeah.
There were so many players,
Yeah.
not just Jackie.
If you're just basing it on talent.
On talent.
If you're just basing it on talent.
If you just
Yeah.
basing it on talent, there were so many guys, but Jackie was the right one.
Yeah. Because I remind people, the first guy, y'all, can't fail.
Can't fail.
If the first guy fails, there is no second guy.
Right.
Yeah, that's how much pressure was on Jackie. So you had to have the right guy.
And he had to have the right temperament. He couldn't fight.
And this was so out of character for Jackie to take this kind of abuse.
Right.
Yeah, Jackie, as Buck O'Neill would describe, was as fiery and feisty an individual as you will ever encounter. But he humbled himself for the greater good. I remind people that Jackie Robinson was court-martialed from the United States Army for refusing to give up his seat on the bus to a white person.
Yep.
And this is well before
Rosa Parks.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, he was court-martialed because he
Texas.
wouldn't do it. Yeah. Yes.
Where I grew up, right around Fort Hood, Texas.
Yep.
You know, and so, yeah, no, this was out of character. As Buck would say, Jackie could duke and would duke. He'd knock you on your rump. But he humbled himself for the greater good, and it took its toll on him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it took its toll. I mean, as I remind people, when Jackie joins the Brooklyn Dodgers, when he would slide into second base, he'd oftentimes come up wet, where the opposition had spit on him. When the opposition slid into second, they came in spikes high trying to cut him. The pitchers would get fined if they didn't knock him down. Yeah. Now, can you imagine how difficult this was for some of them? They didn't want to do it.
I got to.
Right.
I got to do it. You know, because number one, great athlete feel like, man, I can get you out. I don't need to do this. I can get you out.
Right.
Yeah. And they had to do stuff that wasn't necessarily who they were, but they had to do it, you know, to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that I talk about a guy by the name of Willie Wells from Austin, Texas.
Yes, sir.
Willie El Diablo Wells, the
Yep.
devil. And Willie Wells was as fiery as anyone. So if you threw a black cat on the field when Willie Wells walked out on the field, he gonna pick that black cat up and throw it right back where it came from. But all the naysayers would have said, see, I told you they couldn't handle it. Jackie can't play.
Right.
The naysayers are going to say, see, I told you they weren't good enough to play in our league. So you had to have the right guy. And that doesn't mean that there weren't other guys in the Negro Leagues that could have done it. Marty Irvin had the same pedigree that Jackie had.
Right.
He had the same pedigree. He could have very easily have done it. Yeah, but a lot of those guys who had been so acclimated to segregation, they could not have handled the social pressures that came along. That first guy, as the owners were deliberating about this, as they were still holding on to this quote-unquote gentleman's agreement that had kept black players and brown players out of the major leagues, they would always say, well, you know, there is no written doctrination. There's nothing that's written that says a black man can't play in the major leagues. We would be open to a black man playing if we can find the right one. You got all this amazing talent swirling around you, but it had to be the right one. You had to be a standout, upright citizen, high moral standards and character. You had to be everything that maybe 80% of the athletes that played in the major leagues at that time wasn't. They weren't that. No. And that was the expectation that was set on the first black person to play in the major leagues, or in the modern era of the major leagues, because we know there were black guys that played, you know, here and there well before Jackie Robinson.
Oh, yeah.
Moses
Fleetwood Walker was a barehanded catcher.
That wasn't that before the 1900s?
Oh, yeah, that's in the late 1800s, 1880s, I'm sorry. But there was a player that we since discovered by the name, I love this story, by the name of William Edward White, who played one game in what would be considered a major league even before Moses Fleetwood Walker. But here's the caveat. William Edward White didn't know he was black. William Edward White thought he was white.
Oh, my God.
Because his father was white. And he was very light-skinned, and it was later discovered that he was the byproduct of an affair that his father had with one of the slaves. So he was black. Yeah. And so, but Moses Fleetwood Walker, Bud Fowler, who was known as the first black professional player, played on a bunch of white teams, could never stick and stay, even though he was better than everybody else. And it just got to a point where Fowler realized that my skin color is not going to allow me to play this game. And you know, Bud Fowler was inducted into the Hall of Fame this year, the first player from Cooperstown to be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive. All right, here's my final question of the day for you. And I know it's pretty much documented at the museum. Best player from the Negro Leagues to never play in the major leagues.
Man, there's a long laundry list of them. You know, there are a long laundry list. I think about Oscar Charleston, whom Buck O'Neil believed to be the greatest baseball player he had ever seen. He thought that Charleston was Willie Mays before we ever knew who Willie Mays was. 5'2" guy, hit for power, hit for average, could field, could run, could throw. He could do it all. And then I think about the great Cuban star, the great Martin de Higo, El Maestro, his nickname. Played all 9 positions, played all 9 of them well. The only baseball player in the history of our sport to be enshrined into 5 different countries' baseball halls of fame. He's in the Mexican, Cuban, Dominican, Venezuelan, and in Cooperstown.
Wow.
I mean, just it's ridiculous. And then you ask yourself, because you know, as you know, he's standing at the plate on our field of legends, and you ask yourself, how could I not know about a player of this magnitude? Well, that was the plight of the Negro Leagues. This league was filled with talent. And I say this with no hesitation. The talent in the Negro Leagues wouldn't take a back seat to any league. The only thing that separated the Negro Leagues and the Major Leagues was money. The Major League owners had more money. They had their own stadiums. So, yeah, they had greater resources. But when you start to look at the talent, no, man, the talent in the Negro Leagues was as good. We've talked about the catching position, and, you know, when you mentioned Roy Campanella, he ran through that list about 3 times, 3-time MVP. Roy Campanella came to the Negro Leagues, y'all, as a 15-year-old catcher for the Baltimore Elite Giants. Spelled elite, pronounced elite Yeah, you make those Negro Leaguers mad if you call them the elite giants. Here's a young Campanella, 15 years old, and a guy by the name of Raleigh Biz Mackey, another Texan,
Yes.
took him under his wing and taught him the art of catching. Yeah, Biz Mackey. And if Roy Campanella was alive today, he'd tell you the greatest defensive catcher this sport has ever seen was Raleigh Biz Mackey. Yeah, and the catching position never transitioned into Major League Baseball, not really. You know, you get Campy, you get Elston Howard, but by and large, that catching position never transitioned. And I tell people that the catching position in the Negro Leagues was far superior than it was in the Major Leagues, but the catching position was and still is seen as that cerebral position. It's the position that's closest to the manager. Yeah. And so you just did not see a proliferation of black catchers moving into the major leagues. Almost every Negro League team had a dominant catcher. Yeah.
Like I said, it's to me, it's the biggest mishap that I wish we could have been able to capture in it at the lower levels, like what was finally able to and what we see today transcend the NFL, because college coaches finally gave in to a dual threat quarterback, and we can make this work for us. Had college baseball been able to do the same thing, we would be able to see that. And when I go out scouting now, if I'm not at a historically black college and university, I don't see an African American catcher. I bet there's not a handful of them in the minor leagues. And we don't have not one in the major leagues.
Not now.
And so, and who gets the major league? When they talk about why we don't have African American managers, I tell them because we don't catch. Because who are the guys that get the major league manager's position is
Catchers.
guys who are former catchers.
Ned Jones, Mike Matheny.
Oh, the
you just
majority
keep
of them,
going.
right?
No,
You
no.
see a few, but the majority of your managers, because they're seen as the guy who sees the whole field, and like he says, works closely with the manager
Yeah.
and the pitching coach, and so we're giving them all this information. I used to tell them all the time, well, I play out in center field, I see everybody in front of me, so guess what? I see everything too. I see how your pitcher's fastball getting flat. But again, from a managerial standpoint, if it wasn't for college football, the NFL would still be stuck in its ways of here is what the prototypical passer looks like, and here is the cerebral brain that we feel like this person is. But college football forced the hand that they had to reevaluate it, and now we see a plethora of NFL quarterbacks who are African American playing today, and it's only going to become more. Now, the challenge will be is will these positions, especially those who are backups, your Byron Leftwiches and guys like that, will they get their opportunity to lead teams where traditionally in the NFL, your African Americans who have become head coaches came from the defensive side of the ball, like your Tony Dungy's
Right.
and your Lovie Smiths and those guys. And so we're going to see how it translates, and that's why it's been such a big deal for me to try to develop catching at the lower level to see if we can rise some of these young guys up.
Plus, it's
to
always
be-
been the fastest route to the major leagues anyway.
Absolutely. Left-handed pitcher or catcher.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how you get to the big
Yeah.
league. But, again, we haven't seen anybody since Charles Johnson.
Yeah.
Charles Johnson was our last everyday African-American catcher.
Yep.
And he was a
Miami
good one.
Marlins.
Yeah, and he
Or
was a good-
Florida Marlins.
Well, yeah, when they were Florida then, and then obviously he played for the White Sox also. But he was an elite. He was a Gold Glove.
Yes, he was. He was very
defender.
good.
But he was like that even in college, playing at the University of Miami.
And
Yeah.
did he not win a ring?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did.
There you go. Against your Cleveland Indians.
Well,
So how, well, this year we also had the first time, since 1951?
1950.
1950, no black player in the World Series.
Yeah.
And the numbers are declining. How do you try to recruit them to play when, I guess, you have football and you have basketball?
No, you're right. There are a lot of variances that are certainly impacting why we're not playing baseball. And as Darwin knows, some of them are socioeconomic in nature. A sport that was once a blue-collar sport became a country club sport because it moved from the sandlots into organized capacities. And when it became organized, it became a different beast. It is almost pay to play now. Whereas when we were growing up, you never had to worry about a place to play baseball. You could always find a place to play baseball, and you never had to worry about paying to play baseball. That was always taken care of, and it's a different beast now, and so it's organized, it's expensive, the equipment is expensive, it's specialized. You've got to play on travel teams to be seen. League fees that are just outrageous. I mean, people are paying the equivalent of college tuition for their kids to play summer baseball. I'm hearing the cost of some of these tournaments. I was in Cooperstown for the Buck O'Neill Hall of Fame induction, and I just happened to wander into a restaurant, sat down with some folks who were in, I believe they were from Delaware, and they said it cost their team $27,000 to play in the Cooperstown tournament.
Holy
One tournament.
Holy moly.
We had a team, one of our RBI teams here, the Kings, led by Chris Evans. And Chris and I talked about it the first year that I was here, and he took his kids to Cooperstown to play in that tournament. And then, some 5+ years ago, they wind up basically about over $1,000 a player to go, and you have to bring an umpire or sponsor an umpire with you. So they were at about $15,000
Back then.
Just to
No,
get there.
I mean, my mouth dropped open when she said 20 cents. I'm saying, well, how do y'all do that? Well, they have to fundraise it. And this didn't include the cost for the parents to come and spend whatever it is, a
just
week or so
players.
there. That's just for the kids to play. You know, yeah, they get a uniform and these kinds of things, and the meals are taken care of. But, man, it makes it almost impossible for those kids growing up in the urban core, many of them growing up in single-family households, which is a whole nother issue that we need to address at a later date. They can't afford to. And we still got some work to do in our sport. I don't know how it's going to happen, but we have to figure out a way to get more scholarships for baseball.
I think that is a huge factor into it when we look at a football program can offer 90 scholarships, and baseball has 11.7 scholarships. And so those scholarships are being divided up. So if you are a player, I'm gonna just even say myself, coming out of high school, had not I had the love that I had for baseball, it would have been easier for me to take the full football scholarship than it would be to go and play baseball on a partial. Whereas, except for, I went to a junior college where a junior college program, if it's fully funded, has 24 scholarships. So there's a greater opportunity for you to get 100% scholarship. At the FBS level, your scholarship has to be full. Now, we know how much these schools are making, because obviously if you get one team into the college football playoff, that's $15 million for every school in the conference.
Right.
And so when we talk about the type of money, and when you got $100,000 at the we got 100,000 fans at the Horseshoe in Ohio State, or at DK Royal at the University of Texas, there's a lot of money going around.
A lot of money.
And everything. Baseball doesn't have that same opportunity.
No.
And so if you're not in a position to at least pay 50 to 60% of your way to school, then what do you have? Then we're going to do all of that then to go and labor in the minor leagues, hoping that you're going to get an opportunity. And there are some things that I can talk about minor league baseball, but because of who I am, I'm not at liberty to discuss that on here right now. But it's a hard. That choice becomes, for the dual sport athlete, one to say. Amazing. The other day I was watching a video, and Deion Sanders, his son, asked him, said, "Dad, you're going back and you're going to talk to younger Deion. What would you do different?" He's, well, there's a lot of things I would do different. But then he pondered. He said, one thing I probably would have done different. He goes, I probably would have gone and played baseball full time and played football part time.
Yeah.
versus him playing football full time and baseball
Yeah.
part time. He said because of the longevity associated with the game, and he said some of these aches and pains that he has in his body as a result of playing a contact sport, he says I maybe don't have those. But he goes, but I was really glad to hear him say that if he had it to do it all over again, he probably plays baseball.
Yeah. Now, that being said, I am the eternal optimist,
Yes.
and I do believe that the work that people like Darwin and others in our game are doing, because they are dedicating and rededicating themselves to trying to be part of the solution.
Yes.
And we are starting to see more black kids play this game. And they're playing this game thanks to the work of people like Marquise Grissom down in Atlanta that has developed a tremendous program. I'm so happy to see Michael Harris, who came out of his program, and stepped in right out of AA and became almost an instant star with the Atlanta Braves, and just excited to see how his career is going to blossom. Marquise has a great program down in Atlanta. I've been blessed and fortunate to go down to Vero Beach, Florida for several years, where they do Major League Baseball, the Players Association, U.S. Baseball hosts an elite camp, primarily for black kids. There are some brown kids there as well. And you walk into that room and you see some thoroughbreds. Yeah, some thoroughbreds.
Trust me, I spent almost half my summer in Vero scouting this year. But we saw evidence of there's hope.
We saw the draft.
We saw the draft this year when you
Yes.
saw Drew Jones, Kumar Rocker, Tamar Johnson, Elijah Green. Those were 4 of the first 5 draft picks this year that were African American.
Yeah. And I don't think that that's going to be an aberration. I think we're going to see this steadily continue. And I tell people all the time, man, we are not a patient society. We're just
No.
not.
No.
We are a microwave society. We want everything right now.
Instant.
And of course, as you know, there's nothing instant in baseball. It's a process for the things that you talked about, getting through the minor leagues, then trying to get to the show. I do think, though, as we start to see more black players move into the minor leagues, that you can pretty safely predict that you'll start to see the pendulum shift the other way. And so, but it's also going to help us, while we're focused so much on the field, that we also got to start focusing on developing black general managers who hopefully won't be afraid when you get down to players 23 and 24, that there are black kids out there that can fill those roles, and black managers, that will have some say in who makes their team and who doesn't make their team. And so we've got a lot of work to do, but I feel very confident that that work is being done, and that over time we will see the pendulum shift the other way. And you know what? Our game will get a lot more interesting, a lot more exciting, and the speed of the game will change.
Yeah.
It'll change.
So how big was Dusty Baker, the winning manager?
I'm just happy for Dusty. I am ecstatic for Dusty because, number one, he's a dear friend of mine, great friend of the museum, and one of the great guys in our sport, and maybe the only guy that could have taken that Astros team and basically deodorized the stench that was swirling
Right.
around that organization before he got there. It was just hard not to cheer for that. Now, you might not have been an Astro fan,
Right.
but it was hard not to cheer for Dusty. You wanted Dusty to win that World Series. Now, there are those who felt like he needed to win the World Series to cement his place in the Hall of Fame. I did not believe that. Dusty
No.
Baker was a Hall of Famer well before the Astros won that World Series. But, man, I was really happy for him. I was happy for the Astros organization. We've got a lot of friends over there, but, really excited for Dusty. And he moves into that rarefied territory where you've only got Dusty, Cito Gaston, and our guy out there with the Dodgers, as African-American managers, Dave Roberts, to win World Series titles. But it's just because we really haven't been given an opportunity.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's another thing that I'm afraid of. And back to our great legend Buck O'Neill, and back in November I was at the Buck O'Neill Scouts Association conference, where we are trying to get more African Americans involved in scouting, because to me that also matters at who's going to scout these games. And going into the places that I went into this year in Grambling, Louisiana, and down in Mobile and Montgomery, where we've had historically a great number of players that have come out of those areas, right? When you look at Mobile, Alabama, it was just a hotbed for ball players. And so how are we going to get that? And then how is our sport going to embrace this new, what I call hip-hop culture, and all of the excitement and that goes along with it? And Major League Baseball has to look at itself. But Bob's absolutely right, is we have got to see more people in the non-playing positions to inspire. But I think now is a great time, and I've been saying it for the last 5 years, is a great time because of so much surrounding CTE and so many people afraid to allow their kids to play football and contact sport, that there is a great opportunity. But they're going to have MLB. We have a hard time in catching up with the NBA.
Always slow.
The NBA is so far ahead of us, even in how they've made their game global and international. And we see not only the influx of African Americans in basketball, but people from all different countries.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially the European invasion. You see guys like, we had Hall of Famers like Dirk Nowitzki and guys like that. And now, we continue to see the guys like Jokic and all these guys that are playing. Luka Doncic, and baseball has to not move slow, and we've got to be aggressive in getting these kids.
And baseball's got to add a level of cool to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
That's why I say the hip hop culture.
Yeah, they got to embrace that hip hop culture, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with playing the game with a little swag.
Right, but the problem is baseball is still old school.
Yeah, no, they got all these what they call these unwritten rules. These unwritten rules. I don't know who created these unwritten rules, but they weren't in the Negro Leagues. I can tell you that.
Right. Right.
Absolutely, but like I say, I'm like you. I'm hopeful it's into not only on the field, but opportunities that exist off the field, where you can have an impact on how this game is being played, and we can only be hopeful. And so, but it's going to take time. But I thought this year's draft was an indication of really about a decade and a half of concerted effort to the things that Major League Baseball has done to try to get these kids to playing elite level baseball.
And I think those 4 guys that you mentioned that went in the top 5 of this year's MLB draft, they all have superstardom written all over them. Now, we never know how this thing's going to pan out.
Right.
Baseball is still the most inexact, experience when drafting. Now, unlike the NFL and NBA, you miss sometimes, but typically if you draft a guy in the first round in either of those sports, they typically going to play. Yeah, they're going to have an impact. Not always the case in Major League Baseball, because you never know how a kid is going to ultimately be able to weather the challenges that come with playing in the minor leagues. And as I mentioned, Henry Aaron talking about he did not know whether he was going to go play with kids his own age or grown men. And, you're exposed to grown men things when you were a kid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it takes its toll on you. And so you've got to be really mentally tough, as well as having the physical gifts to play this game. But the mental aspect of it is, it's a grind.
It's a grind.
Well, it is, because as he was saying, hip hop, the world right now, well, minor leagues are not the hip hop world.
No. You're still
That's
playing
far from that.
Yeah, you're still playing in these small, many times rural communities and that kind of thing. And there's not a great appeal to that. But man, once you get to the show,
right, there's a difference.
And you can get that second contract.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I tell them, as a guy who experienced the minor leagues, you start out in small towns, and the higher you go up, the towns get bigger. And so, but those first couple of years is the challenge. Trying to get out of the Silent League, or when I played in the New York Penn League and the Silent League and the Carolina League, and those, it's a lot difficult. And so, but I look at of those first 4 that were drafted this year, they were high schoolers. Okay, KUAW was the only one who
Right,
was a
exactly.
college player. And then if you go to pick 17 and 18, we have sons of former major leaguers that were at
Exactly.
17 and 18 with Cam Collier, Lou Collier's son, and then Carl Crawford's son, who was also drafted in the first round this year. And so they were both at 17 and 18 respectively. And so these guys are going to have the benefit of having major league fathers to be able to coach them through
And guide them
those
through.
and guide them through
Yeah.
those hard times.
Yeah.
Whereas some other guys I know that weren't as fortunate because as a minor leaguer, I wound up rooming with two guys who were slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
And here these guys are young guys with a bunch of talent coming out of rural Georgia. Ain't never seen that much money that these organizations had fed into them. And, you know, how do we keep these guys on track to achieving what they can achieve because they had the goods.
Right.
They had the goods. And so that's why I'm excited that these young men are going to have fathers that can guide them. And I look forward to seeing those guys become, longtime major league players because of that advantage.
Yeah. No, it's exciting to think about the future of our game, though, because, again, we're all involved in this sport, and we want to see this sport continue to grow and thrive, and we want to see that everyone has an opportunity. Yeah, baseball is better when everyone has an opportunity to play
Oh,
this game.
absolutely.
Yeah, the game just gets better. Now, the Negro Leagues prove that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Negro Leagues, not to oversimplify anything, when the doors open for black and brown players to play in the major leagues, what happened? Major League Baseball got better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
as simple as that. Yeah, the game got better. And so if you've got a section of the population that's not involved, then you're missing out. And that's no different in the business world.
Right.
If everybody around the table looks like you, then you're not opening up the opportunities for diverse thoughts and ideas and impact. And I think that's what we're still trying to push. And that's what the Negro Leagues, I think, again, when it's all said and done, teaches us. That diversity, equity, and inclusion are vitally important, and they should be embraced.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Growing up, I used to watch Reggie Jackson, Mr. October, Ricky Henderson. I used to love watching him steal bases. Willie Wilson, Frank White, I've delivered his mail before, so I've actually had a chance to talk with him a few times.
No,
and
those
stuff.
guys. Those guys were all impact players that you talk
Right,
about.
absolutely. So I see all those players, but today I don't see those impact players, and I'm hoping that they do show up and they come out eventually.
No, and we've got to do a better job. Yeah. So we've got to do a better job. Mookie Betts to me is, I think, best player in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at everything that he can do,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure people know who Mookie is. And why wouldn't they? They should.
We should.
They should, because baseball still holds on to that traditional no one's bigger than the team thing.
Yeah.
And the NBA and the NFL don't look at it that way.
No.
We put our stars out front, everybody else comes along. When I tell people it was Satchel Paige and the Kansas City Monarchs, and nobody on the Monarchs complained that
Nope.
it was Satchel because they were going to eat. They're going to eat. And we are a star-driven society. We like stars. And we've got some great young players in our game. I hope that we figure out a way to help create that star power around them. And that it's okay that they stand out and still can be part of a team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I love the kid in Seattle. I think he was Rookie of the Year this year.
Julio Rodriguez.
He's got the goods. He
Yep.
got it. And he's got the it factor that goes along with it.
Right.
But when you got a sport where it can be dominated by a guy the size of Jose Altuve on one end of the spectrum, Aaron Judge on the other end of the spectrum, why wouldn't you push this agenda out there to let these kids say, man, you can be 5'5" and weigh 160, 170 pounds and play this game and dominate, or you can be 6'9" and weigh 260, 270 and be able to dominate at this game. That's the beauty of our game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because 5'5", you're not dominating the NFL or the NBA.
No.
No. No.
You are like a comet that comes along once everybody with like a Sproles.
Though Muggsy Bogues did an amazing job.
But there's a difference.
But that was a rarity.
That's why I say he's a comment.
Muggsy
but there's a
Bogues, Bud
difference
Webb.
of playing in the league and dominating.
The league.
True.
They played. Yeah. They played, and they were an anomaly, because you're just not going to get that too often. It does happen every now and
Right.
then. Not that often, though.
Right, because the guys that we think are small in the NBA are not small. Steph Curry is 6'3".
Right.
He ain't no small guy, but
Right.
when you see him out there amongst all them 6'9", 6'10", he look little.
Right.
And that's what I tell a lot of the young kids that I see now, and I don't want to burst anybody's dream, but I'm like, your daddy 5'7", your mama 5'5". Odds of you being 6'3" is probably not good. Baseball, come on over here and play this game. Look at our two and some other guys.
Exactly.
And you can have that opportunity to utilize that skill versus, again, being a comet and coming through. When you're 6 foot tall and they call you tiny, like Tiny Archibald.
Yep.
it's harder. Or you see a Sproles or some of these other smaller. Sproles was really small to play running back.
Yes.
And things like that. And so it's hard to see those guys or Doug Flutie at being 5'9", 5'10". Kyler Murray is an anomaly. Trying to change the game at being a small quarterback.
Yeah.
And
Right.
you're measuring out, and even Drew Brees. Drew Brees was just a hair under 6 foot tall, and being able to play the quarterback position. It's just more difficult for you in those sports where your physical attributes play such a huge role. But you put that bat in your hand and you can swing it. They'll find a place for you.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, we've had ourselves a great evening. I appreciate you coming out, and I'm telling you what, I'm going to share this on my Facebook and whatever. You guys need to watch this and learn, because when you've been on my show a couple of times, I have learned something every time, and everybody's like, "Oh, you don't learn nothing." But I'm telling you what, just the stuff that you learn is just incredible. And and as he said, it's like taking a bite of something you really don't want, but as soon as you take a bite and you enjoy it, you want more of it.
You say, "Oh, this is pretty good."
Absolutely.
I've been involved with the Negro Leagues Museum now for 29 years. As I mentioned, I started as a volunteer in 1993. Who knew? Mm-hmm. And I still find the story just as fascinating today as I did 29 years ago when I was introduced to it. It's an amazing piece of history, both American and baseball history, and I'm still learning. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm still learning. That's how fascinating it is for me, that it's still a constant quest to learn. And then to be able to share these stories. And so the opportunity to come on with you guys and talk a little baseball history and talk about the Negro Leagues is a valuable opportunity that I absolutely appreciate. So thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So we're going to get off here. Darwin picked Buffalo tonight. Obviously, I'm wearing the Patriots, so I think the Patriots will win. I'm going to say 2017. I think it will be a low-scoring game. Josh Allen has struggled with that arm injury ever since he got yanked in the loss a few weeks, or what was it, against Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So, plus, it will benefit us, the Chiefs, a little bit more. So, but I've got 20-17, and again, Bob Kendrick, Darwin Penny, Coach 24, George Walker, DJ Scatter, and I am Brian Kress, the awesome voice. Be awesome, not angry, and you guys have yourself a great football and sports weekend. Go USA.